What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So there, of course, has been a lot of discussion around Nintendo's strategy going into next generation with hardware, but also on the side of software and services with Nintendo Switch Online coming up quite often for what system could be added in. But based on a new patent that's been brought up from a familiar source, it appears that the GameCube has once again entered the arena, and we're going to go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about GDC and how apparently some developers are not very excited for a PlayStation 5 Pro. And then Phil Spencer had an interview where he painted quite a strange picture for the future of game consoles. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And of course, members for the channel do get Newswave early and ad-free. If you want to learn more about that, click the join button down below this video. And we're gonna start today with Palworld and Tencent. Tencent, of course, is a big player in just the gaming industry when it comes down to how much revenue they generate. And now it looks like they have their sights set on their own version of Palworld. This is posted up over on the Financial Post saying Tencent Holdings' two most accomplished creative studios are making mobile games in the style of this year's biggest viral hit, Palworld, in hopes of rebooting the company's core business. Is it surprising that a company like Tencent would realize the viral success of Palworld and not try to take advantage? No, it's not surprising at all. And in fact, them trying to get it on just mobile devices, I think has explosive growth potential there in general, with Palworld doing really, really well on PC through Steam and then also on Xbox and Game Pass, just in early access. Yeah, it's sort of now a race to try to get one of these games out, because Palworld, I think, will be in early access for quite some time, actually. So I still think something like this will take time to get out there, but them targeting kind of the mobile space may allow them to have one that gets out there that is a bit smaller in scope and also more reliant on just microtransactions and, of course, dropping that barrier of having to buy the game up front. So we'll see if Tencent can pull off something like Palworld, but on mobile phones. Also, it looks like Marvel is ramping up for an announcement later on this morning. This is posted up by Jeff Keighley over on X, saying tomorrow, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, new Marvel games reveal. And it appears the rumor going around right now is that it would be some sort of hero shooter, like kind of like an Overwatch style game, but just with Marvel characters, like I guess superheroes, villains, and I'm still not the biggest fan of hero shooters necessarily. However, I do understand the push here from Marvel, where of course they can take all their different heroes and big brand names and stuff and jam them into a game that maybe it's free to play, maybe it's not, but obviously there are avenues that they can work in for it to have live service potential with multiplayer and stuff down the road. So I'll at least hold off judgment until I see it, but hero shooters, again, it's not really something I've gotten too into, but we'll see what Marvel has for us here, actually in just a couple of hours, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Oh, and we did get a new firmware update from Nintendo for the Switch. That's 18.0.0, and let me ask you this before we take a look at the patch notes. When was the last time we had a substantial update from Nintendo for their current system? Because I feel like it's been a long time. Well, here are the patch notes for 18.0.0. Yeah, it's not much. Added 15 minutes as an option for auto sleep when playing on TV. All right. Added Korean as a supported language for Nintendo Switch parental controls. Introductory video. And then just general system stability improvements to enhance the user's experience, which people noticed was more or less just different words being added to the bad word list, or basically the list that filters out different things when you put them in for, I guess, character names or your account names or that sort of thing. Again, it just, whenever I see a firmware update now for the Switch, I just assume it's stuff like this. I kind of think Nintendo has just completely moved on to the new system in the background right now, and that also comes down to just feature sets. And well, at this time, the Switch is kind of rolling along on its own anyway, so here's hoping Nintendo shows up with a more feature-rich system for next generation, and hopefully we find out here in a couple of months leading into June. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a patent that's been making the rounds that has many people talking about GameCube being next up for Nintendo Switch Online, even though that I mean, that's what you would figure at this point with the N64 and Game Boy Advance being added in. If you're going to the next one for Nintendo in line, it would be the GameCube or the DS on the handheld side, but GameCube does make sense to a degree for Nintendo, which we'll get into here. But first, this is the tweet that really started to get people talking about this from Nash Weedle, who says Nintendo seems to have GameCube emulation ready. It recently updated a patent based on the system, which joins other recent patents on Cube console control. So in this message, there is also a reply that just shows some of the images from the patent, and everyone was kind of asking, okay, what patent is this exactly? Like, to me, if you're throwing this stuff out there, you should probably source where it's coming from as well, so people can kind of go over it and look into this a bit more. And it was actually kind of hard to find this patent, to be honest. Like, I had many people kind of messaging this to me, like, as soon as he posted this up, and I took the day to kind of look up and find the patent, which I was able to. It was actually out of Germany. It was the German Patent and Trademark Office, which at that point, I then had to feed it through Google Translate to give me at least a decent enough understanding as to what was happening here. But I do have the patent here, and it's technically from March 2001. That's the original filing date, and they actually kept it secret until the disclosure of October 4th, 2001, because yes, it followed along with the GameCube, as you'd assume, based on, again, what Nash Weedle was concluding here. And the publication date of the most recent grant or update, which March 7th, 2024. So it is indeed fairly recent. There is at least some updates that Nintendo did to this, whether that's them just essentially re-upping the patent or what have you there. But the thing that I really enjoyed out of all of this was the image that you see. This, I guess, in prototyping and stuff, I mean, here's a GameCube forum. It was N64 controller hooked up. You got the disc at the top. And they do point out that number 60 there that's being pointed to in that diagram is indeed a memory card, even though it already kind of looks like a upside down SD card there. And then you, of course, have the tube TV that's hooked up. Anyway, from what I can gather with this patent, it's more or less describing Nintendo's method of emulation, and then also having an entire menu system to pick through different games that system would be emulating. And they have many diagrams kind of showcasing this using things like the Legend of Zelda series, Mario Kart, and even just other as a tab here. But as I'm looking through this, I do realize this is something Nintendo's been doing for a long time. I mean, you can even go back to, sure, the Virtual Console on the Wii, where they had all kinds of stuff being emulated. But even before that, they've done different collections. Like on the GameCube, they had the Zelda collection, where you could play Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Zelda 1 and 2, even from the NES, all jammed onto one of the mini DVDs. But then also recently, we've had the Mario 3D All-Stars collection. Basically, this patent just describes their form of emulation then being applied to a collection like that. However, the patent is fairly extensive with Nintendo's emulation techniques, setups, that sort of thing, and the most recent time being updated earlier this month in March 2024. I understand how people would look at this and say, okay, obviously this means that GameCube is going to Nintendo Switch Online. I do believe GameCube is going to NSO at some point, and in fact, might even be a way for Nintendo to get people to jump from the current Switch to their next generation device a year or two from now. I don't necessarily look at this patent and go, well, this is it. GameCube is definitely going because of this. It just seems to be a patent that Nintendo has consistently leveraged and used since its inception back in 2001. So if nothing else, at least we got a really cool image of a prototype GameCube there with a Nintendo 64 controller. But yeah, mostly just talk about Nintendo's emulation strategies and then really just an update recently. Most likely because they probably want to use this again in the future. Go figure. Next up, let's talk about Judas, which is basically the next BioShock, or at least that's how all of us are pretty much looking at it, with Ken Levine, of course, heading the project. And we had a ton of preview footage and discussion that was posted yesterday. It came from IGN with Ryan McCaffrey and Jeff Keighley sitting down with Ken Levine, as well as the Friends Per Second podcast with Skillup and Jake and others talking with Ken Levine. And he sat down for hours, basically, going over all the ins and outs of the game without spoiling much really about it, and even talking about some of the business side with Take-Two and 2K. But either way, you can see some of the footage here, as they did also, of course, release a recent story trailer about a month ago for the game, and some of the details coming out of it. Yes, it is BioShock in space, from Ken Levine. It's non-linear story structure. The main character has memory issues, which, yeah, that's kind of how you start up, obviously, the beginning of a story. They want to have kind of a mystery that builds up as you go through it. There are 3 major side characters that you follow, and each of these narratives happen all at once, and they said narrative Legos a couple of times in there, so I feel like they are going to have this set up to where you have branching paths and you just sort of pick which way you're going without it being too spelled out. And I guess at that point it'll be different for... I hear this a lot for many different games, that they're going to have these narrative experiences that have twists and turns, and it's all reliant on your actions, and then we get it. It just doesn't feel that impactful. I'm hoping that one of the big aha moments for something like this with Ken Levine, who's been working on it for so long, is that it genuinely feels like everybody is having a different experience with a narrative-driven single-player game. Very, very much harped on that one. No online elements, anything there. And there will be some roguelike elements, and the thing that I really liked about this is they showed this like 3D print regeneration that happens with, like, they showed the character's arm kind of just getting printed back into existence, and I guess you just kind of regenerate after you die. But that, when I saw that, I said, okay, that looks kind of like that weird BioShock sort of moment. So I really, really like what I'm seeing here with Judas, and hearing them kind of talk about this on something like the FPS podcast. It's very, very compelling stuff to go over, and I highly recommend checking out FPS podcast and IGN with that sit down with Ken Levine. As for when this game is coming out, Take-Two has sort of alluded to the idea that this title would be out before the end of March 2025, that being their fiscal year. So that's kind of what I'm lining up now. It could possibly make it out holiday 2024, and that would probably be the best time, obviously, for the buying season. But for a game like this, the name Ken Levine behind it, with the last title he did, BioShock Infinite, I think a ton of people will be paying attention to this one, because BioShock is still, for many people, one of the best games of all time. At least it's on that list somewhere. So yeah, we'll be paying attention to Judas when it comes out. Next up, let's talk about an interview that Phil Spencer had with Polygon. And I will admit, this is kind of spelling out a very weird future for game consoles, and if it goes this route, I do wonder what kind of identity each system would really have at the end of the day. But let's take a look. These are some quotations from that Polygon interview, where Phil Spencer says, "Consider our history as the Windows company. Nobody would blink twice if I said, hey, when you're using a PC, you get to decide the type of experience you have by picking where to buy games. There's real value in that. Moore's Law slowed down the price of the components of a console aren't coming down as fast as they have in previous generations." And he does mention that it's very difficult now to subsidize the purchase of a console over time, because the prices of the components are not moving at all, like in the right direction for them, which would be going down, and then also, of course, giving us a cheaper system. So having to look elsewhere and maybe onboard other stores would be an option. He says, I will say that this may seem too altruistic. I don't know that it's growing the industry. So I think, what are the barriers? What are the things that create friction in today's world for creators and players? And how can we be part of opening up that model, alluding to the idea of something like Epic Game Store showing up on the Xbox console? Could you have Steam? That is a big question mark, and something that many people read this interview and thought, is he talking about opening up the Xbox system to other stores, not just the Xbox Store, of course, that's just built into the platform. When you turn on your Xbox, it's a very curated set of games that work for that system, right? Then you also have your Game Pass tab, sure. But the idea of starting up your Xbox, there being an Epic Game Store tab, maybe EA, like how they have their own EA store, Ubisoft store, Steam. It feels like that would get kind of annoying, but technically it would all be there on your Xbox. And if they can make it so that every game just goes into a tab on your library, you don't think about which store it necessarily came from when you launch it, I don't think people would mind that much. But the thing that's very, very interesting about this, if they get Steam on the Xbox, does that mean that those PlayStation games would work on the Xbox as well? That's the part where I kind of stop and go, okay, how is all of this really going to work? I understand they would then be shipping basically a PC in a box, but the thing that makes a console different technically is you don't deal with all the issues that PC can present, whether it's just the game crashing constantly, or maybe one part that you have in your system not being correct, drivers being off. But if you have games that aren't necessarily set up specifically for that hardware, you could introduce a lot of those issues. So it makes me wonder if it would be kind of like the Steam Deck, where you have Steam Deck verified titles that go into a tab and you know you're good to go, then other ones where you're kind of rolling the dice for what kind of experience you're going to get. But I will say that would be very, very weird, right? If you had Steam on your Xbox, you launch it, and God of War is there, and you could buy it and play it on your Xbox. Horizon, Sony has made a big push on Steam, and that, strangely enough, that could come back to bite them then if their titles just start showing up on Xbox. Who knows? Maybe they don't care because that's just kind of the way that the industry is going, and at least that's how Microsoft is sort of painting all of this out to be, whereas Nintendo is not at all on that bandwagon. They're just like, no, we walled garden, we're good, we're cutting all of this off, you have to buy our hardware. Sony kind of coming around a little bit with their big push for PC now, mobile coming up soon, and who knows, maybe they have a launcher and then all of a sudden their VR headset also works on PC. But it does make me wonder, let's say in a future that Microsoft is talking about here, if you play all the games on any of these different systems, I'm not really sure what makes them that different from each other. Really just, I guess, some of the smaller features that are offered for the controller, maybe the OS level, kind of what it looks like when you turn it on, potentially functionality, like one being a handheld and one not. I don't know. It just doesn't necessarily have the same kind of personality, maybe, and identity that we've been used to for these different game consoles. But let me know what you think of a future like that. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the PlayStation 5 Pro, and apparently how developers aren't that excited necessarily for it, and even kind of questioning the need for it. Well, this is posted up actually from Christopher Dring over on gamesindustry.biz, where he says, a couple of companies said this isn't going to grow the market. It's not going to move the needle. This generation doesn't even seem to have got started really, let alone feel the need for a mid-generation update. How about we just get some original next-generation software up and spinning? And this was apparently a result of different discussions at GDC, the Game Developer Conference, this past week. And yeah, the generation, it felt like it was off to a slow start, just overall. And some of that has to do with, I think, just the prolonged cross-generational period and how a lot of those first-party titles from Sony, the big ones anyway, were just on both platforms. We had Spider-Man 2, that was just on the PS5, but I'm thinking of things like God of War Ragnarok, Horizon Forbidden West, those titles showing up with a PS4 logo. Well, sure, if you didn't have a PS5, because I understand at the time, it was still kind of hard to find one early on, and as we got closer to some of these releases, it became a bit easier. But still, if you just had your PS4, it was nice to see that logo. But I mean, more than 3 years in now, you go, okay, guys, when are we just going to make the push for using the base PS5? Oh wait, now here's a PS5 Pro. So while this would technically be a year later than when Sony had the PS4 Pro show up in that generation, it still feels like this one's getting started. And also, if you're a developer who's not making a super graphically intensive game, maybe it's like an indie title, the PS5, the base PS5 is probably fine for you. And you're wondering, well, now I have to account for a PS5 Pro when I'm developing this, because you will have to make sure, obviously, your game would work for that SKU as well with a different configuration. It's just more work, and with how game development is and just getting all your stuff verified with PlayStation just seems like another headache to deal with. So I wouldn't be shocked to hear that, yes, some developers are a little split on it, wondering why we even need it. But at the same time, some of these games right now that we have that are PS5 specific, like a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it does kind of show me that, yeah, maybe in some cases a PS5 Pro would actually be nice. And before we go to the comments of the day, we're taking a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, do you play split-screen multiplayer in games? Okay, so sometimes, but not very often, was the leading vote getter at 54%. No, I never use split-screen multiplayer, 28%. And then, yes, I use split-screen a lot, 18%. Back in the day, I feel like that top one, yes, would have been like through the roof, 80% or something. But now, it's just been easier and easier to go online and just play with friends that way when you have an hour or two, maybe at night after work or just on the weekends. But I actually put this poll up after I saw some of the discussion very recently about Dragon Ball Sparking Zero maybe not having split screen, and it's just, you don't have that local multiplayer option, which seems weird because we've had that for a lot of these, like almost all of these Dragon Ball Z games, but maybe not for Sparking Zero. And that might even be a reflection of the times now, because a lot of these companies, I'm sure, have the data that shows that, yeah, split screen just is not used as much as it was before. And we'll finish up with the comments of the day. We'll start with this one here. This is posted up by Cowboy. It says, I want my Chow Garden back. It's really funny because at that time, Sega technically made an awesome game inside of a game with the Chow Garden. Even though I didn't really get into that, I saw the appeal. I understand it with like the VMU and being on the Dreamcast and within that Sonic adventure style game, but I was all about the Sonic adventure stuff. But I had a lot of friends who I swear played Chow Garden more than the main game itself. So that would be interesting to see that make a comeback in some fashion by Sega. Who knows? Maybe they have a side project set up where they're going to introduce a whole new Chow Garden style game, and it's just its own game. That would be something. And then we'll go to a comment from the members video. We can see this is from Capono, who says, shout out to Nix's, another quality port. Best purchase Sony has made, hands down. I will say I think that's Insomniac, though, based on just their output, but Nix is behind the scenes, but they've been doing some pretty good work, especially recently with Forbidden West. I feel like with PC ports nowadays, if you don't hear about it, it's probably good, because most times PC ports blow up in the news because they're terrible in terms of optimization or quality. All I hear right now is Dragon's Dogma 2 constantly online with the sketchy PC version right now. But Horizon, I see people posting up screenshots, even on medium settings, where they're thrilled with how it looks and how it runs. I think they had just over 40,000 concurrent players on Steam at one point, which for a later port like that from the PS5, that seems pretty good. So I do wonder what numbers would be if the next Horizon game was just on PlayStation 5 and PC all at the same time. Could they top 100 some odd thousand concurrent players? Yeah, I think that is very possible, but at least for now, seems that Nix's is finding their role within PlayStation Studios, and I think it's going to be a very important one in the years coming up. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. Was the idea of GameCube maybe making its way to Nintendo Switch Online here in the future, the patent that has the prototype GameCube with the N64 controller. And what about Phil Spencer painting an interesting picture for the future of game consoles where you can buy your game anywhere across all platforms? What do you think that future would look like? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.